Rachel Levine, that's Biden's pick to be one of the top assistant secretaries at HHS, was grilled on Capitol Hill yesterday, but it was one exchange that caused a firestorm.
Dr. Levine, you have supported both allowing minors to be given hormone blockers to prevent them from going through puberty, as well as surgical destruction of a minor's genitalia. Like surgical mutilation, hormonal interruption of puberty can permanently alter and prevent secondary sexual characteristics. The American College of Pediatricians reports that 80 to 95% of prepubertal children with gender dysphoria will experience resolution by late adolescence if not exposed to medical intervention and social affirmation. Dr. Levine, do you believe that minors are capable of making such a life-changing decision as changing one's sex?
Well, Senator, thank you for your interest in this question. Transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field.
Let's be a little more specific since you evaded the question. Do you support the government intervening to override the parent's consent to give a child puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and/or amputation surgery of breasts and genitalia?
If confirmed to the position of Assistant Secretary of Health, I would certainly be pleased to come to your office and to talk with you and your staff about the standards of care and the complexity of this field.
Let it go into the record that the witness refused to answer the question. I find it ironic that the left that went nuts over hydroxychloroquine being used possibly for COVID are not alarmed that these hormones are being used off-label.
Now, for that perfectly reasonable, logical, scientifically accurate line of questioning, Senator Rand Paul became public enemy #1 over at the other cable.
Rand Paul of Kentucky, once seen as someone with at least a kind of interesting, coherent ideology. Lately, he's been spending his days trafficking in right-wing conspiracy theories, today lobbing transphobic questions.
You know who is the actual absolute worst? Well, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, of course. Insulting your fellow human who is trans is a Republican requirement.
Here now to respond, the senator himself, Rand Paul from the great state of Kentucky. Senator, now, I thought they were supposed to be the party of science, but her answer to you was, well, Dr. Paul, it's too complex for you to understand. What's going on here?
Well, the thing is, a lot of people voted for middle-class Joe Biden. He was supposed to have these middle-class, working-class values. My guess is none of them realized that he was going to appoint someone so extreme as to believe that a minor can make a life-altering decision to change their sex, even overriding the parental consent. Now, I think they would do it with no parental consent, but I think she would also do it if the parent said no and the kid said yes. She's also on record as saying, well, yeah, and if they're street kids, we'll do it even sooner. Think of what that really means. That means a homeless child who's either had a rotten childhood or no parents or has a mental illness themselves, she's willing to do the sex change even quicker. They did a survey of these sex change surgeons. Over half of them have operated on people under 18. So this is not a wild question. This is a real question. And they're giving these hormones that change the sex, testosterone to girls and estrogen to boys between the ages of 14 and 16. It's a crime against nature. And it's also something that should require parental consent.
Well, you actually cannot change somebody's sex. That's a scientific falsehood. You can't change. I mean, you can't change their sex. Your DNA is what your DNA is, correct?
You can change their secondary sexual characteristics. So some of their appearance is resembling.
Right, but that's not changing your sex. Yeah, that's not changing your sex. I mean, right. Now, a new Gallup poll is very interesting. It shows that there has been a fairly significant generational shift when it comes to identifying as LGBTQ. Now, Generation Z, apparently 15.9% identify as LGBT. Among millennials, it's 9.1%. Generation X, 3.8%. Senator, is this are we supposed to believe this is a natural shift, or are external factors, including social media, the internet, and so forth, having an effect here?
The story of Kira Bell from England is an interesting one. She was 14, she was confused, and she read online about transsexuals, and she thought, well, maybe this is what I am. She went to a clinic, and they encouraged her that that's what she was. I don't know that anybody discouraged her from that. They encouraged her from that. She had a chemical transformation, and then she had a double mastectomy, and she's now 23. She fears she's infertile. She's very unhappy, and she feels as if she was misled and sort of by social pressure made to think this was the right answer for her, and she's very unhappy. And in England, they've actually changed it now. They're actually requiring more parental consent than they used to, whereas in our country, we're going the opposite way. So I think it's an important question, and the media, at least the left-wing media, completely missed the question here. The question's about a minor and a consent. Look, I'm a physician. I worked in emergency rooms. We couldn't do anything unless you were resuscitating and saving the life of a child. We did nothing without the parents' consent.
Well, apparently the left believes you can get an abortion or take hormone-blocking medicines. That's okay, but everything else, ear piercing, you need your parents' consent. Now, I want to move on to another medical issue. With all the COVID cases, Senator Paul, plummeting, and now we have all these vaccines on the market, Dr. Fauci doesn't quite want you getting your life back yet.
There is a tendency, given that the deflection of the curve is down, to get back to a situation where you're approaching normal. But we really have to be careful. We are at that very precarious position that we were right before the fall surge, where anything that could perturb that could give us another surge. We don't want to be people always looking at the dark side of things, but you want to be realistic.
Senator, there's always like these vague threats that, it's all meant to suppress us or keep us down, or it might come back. There might be a new variant. What is going on here with the constant goalpost shifting?
Realize that they don't want to offer you any of your freedom back, any of this normalization. And there are a lot of people now predicting that the curve downwards is so steep and the curve upward is pretty steep on those being vaccinated that we could be out of this in a few weeks to a month. Now, I know that sounds optimistic and nobody can predict for certain, but he's saying, oh, you're going to need to wear a mask for another 2 years. They're saying you might get it if you had the vaccine and give it to other people. The thing is, they don't prove that that happens. They just say unless you can prove the opposite, you can't be free and you have to be huddled in your basement and wearing a mask. And I'm the opposite. If you get your vaccine, you've had your second dose, you're 2 weeks out, throw away your mask. If you've had the disease and you're a young person, go to restaurants, go out and visit with your friends. Do not hunker down in a basement by yourself. Go to school. By all means, let's get back to normal. And let's treat this with circumspection. The idea that the risk should be according to, the individual. In a free society, each individual determines the risk. They're a lot less for younger people. They're greater for older people. Everybody should adjust their behavior according to that.
Yeah, lockdowns don't work. Lockdowns don't work. I mean, they don't work. They don't stop the virus. And it just prolongs herd immunity. We've seen this time and again, and yet the party of science just doesn't want to quite go there. Senator, thank you for asking hard questions of Ms. Levine. I think it was necessary, and it opened a lot